'Tis our tradition around here to give a quick shout out to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter before Instagram and TikTok catch up. Howdy, folks. Welcome to the off season. All right, we are live. Welcome back to A to Z Sports Cincinnati. I'm your host, John Sheeran, and it is the off season for all 32 teams now. We just watched, I guess it was a Super Bowl between the Seahawks and the Patriots. And you know what? I don't want to disparage what the Seahawks did and the quality of that Super Bowl. I think it was better than what the Seahawks did like 13, 12 years ago when they completely dismantled the Denver Broncos, and the Broncos never really showed up to play. But it is nice to see a dominant defensive performance led by a great play calling defensive coordinator, head coach in Mike Macdonald, a great team that was built through the draft in an aggressive manner that the Seahawks really just constructed the way that they wanted their defense to be. The fact that the Seahawks identified certain needs for what they needed to fulfill Mike Macdonald's scheme. And it all came together in obviously a very opportune matchup in which they just dismantled the Patriots offense for 3 quarters and really just didn't make that a game for the majority of that Super Bowl. And that's why the Seattle Seahawks are Super Bowl champions, and everyone, including the Cincinnati Bengals, are looking to catch up with them. And that poll process has started for the Bengals for the last 6 weeks, but now everyone is in the game now. And we have a month until the league year begins, a month until free agency begins, a month until trades can happen. And we're still about 2 months away from the NFL draft. But the NFL draft as a conversation has started for the Bengals since really December, November, when everyone realized that the 2025 season was not going to go the way that anyone had hoped. And since the start of the NFL draft season for the Bengals, there's been one name that I know everyone watching this stream has been clamoring about, and it's none other than Ohio State safety Caleb Downs. This is the show. The Caleb Downs is going to be the show tonight because, again, he is the most mocked player to the Bengals in any mock draft that's before the NFL scouting combine. The Bengals picked 10th overall. Caleb Downs is consensus-wise a top 10 player in this class. Everything really supports that. We're going to get into more of that, and I'm going to get some expert analysis, opinions, and film takeaways from none other than Mike Santagata, who does phenomenal film room content for SI Bengals, has been a constant presence on Bengals Twitter for the past 6 or 7 years. Just someone that I really trust in terms of what he sees when he watches players, and just in general, a phenomenal dude. So we're going to have him on here in about 5 to 10 minutes or so. But before we really get into that, I want to explain why I think Caleb Downs deserves a full 30-minute conversation about him. Because I think on the surface, the reason why Caleb Downs has been such a popular name with the Bengals is not just because he's an Ohio State guy. It's not just because he plays the position in which the Bengals were terrible at, for the entirety of the 2025 season. Geno Stone is a free agent. There just seems to be like a natural ascension in terms of a guy that you draft in the first round to take over, to be a starter, and to be not only just a starter, but a leader. All of that makes sense. The reason why I think it's a conversation is because it may not be that big of a slam dunk as people may think that it is. The reason why Caleb Downs, for as good as he is, right, as good as he looks on paper, as good as he looks on film, the reason why he's even a conversation to be picked 10th overall and even lasting that long, and the fact that he's not a consensus top 5 pick, it goes beyond just who Caleb Downs is as a player. It goes down to the position that he plays. It goes down to, is that position valuable in today's NFL? Did the Super Bowl prove that to be otherwise, right? When you have guys like Nicky Manwari making plays for a great defense. I think all of that is why this is such a fascinating conversation, and a conversation specifically around the Bengals that's worth having. But before we really get into that, I think it is worth just going over who Caleb Downs is as a player and just some general background information. Caleb Downs was the number 1 recruit coming out of high school in 2022, and he was a commit to the University of Alabama, one of Nick Saban's final recruiting classes. I remember hearing about him from a friend who was close with Josh Downs, who's Caleb Downs' brother, and there was this talk about how he was considering Georgia in the recruiting process and things of that nature. He ended up going to Alabama. Obviously, if you're a defensive back, high school prospect, and you get committed to go play under Nick Saban, there's probably some really good things about you. And obviously, being a 5-star recruit that he was everything and a slice of pizza. I don't think that's the term. I don't think that's the phrase that I'm thinking about, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. Everything, right? As the freshman, just immediately coming into a dominant defense and filling his role just beautifully and just always playing time on task and just not making any mistakes as a true freshman for one of the best teams in the country. And then Nick Saban steps down as Alabama's head coach, and he becomes easily the number one recruit in the transfer portal. And he's got every single option at his disposal. And he lands on Ohio State. And Ohio State now has its best defensive back prospect, its best defensive back in general since maybe Denzel Ward, right? Like definitely since the best safety since Malik Hooker. They are in such a position, they're just loaded as a roster entering the 2024 season. It's no surprise that they go on and win the college football playoff national championship. And watching Caleb Downs that season, it was really my first real exposure about who he was as a player. And it didn't take long for me to realize that, yeah, this guy doesn't make any mistakes. He is just always in position. He's always making form tackles. Doesn't matter what his coverage assignment is. Doesn't matter how close he is to the line of scrimmage. Doesn't matter his alignment. He is just a nearly flawless player in terms of just where his production is and the quality of his production and the quality of his tape. And it really continued into 2025 to the point where it was almost kind of boring, right? There was nothing really new to learn about Caleb Downs, despite, Ohio State evolving as a team and maybe they weren't as good as they were the year that they won the national championship, but the production was still solid, right? There was some questions about, maybe this guy doesn't have as much ball production as you would want for an elite ball hawking safety. But guy again doesn't miss tackles, just a quality tackler, someone who communicates with the rest of the defense before the play happens, someone who gets guys lined up, who's always in position, and just is always as dependable as you would want for a player in the back half of your secondary. And that continued through the 2025 season. So it was no surprise that Caleb Downs declares for the 2026 NFL draft and is one of the top prospects in this year's class. In terms of production, the guy, relative to his age, relative to the caliber of teams and the schedule that Ohio State played, relative to all of that, is one of the best in this class. I think production wise, he is someone that you take with a first round pick and not even think twice about in terms of just tackles, in terms of ball production, in terms of all of that. As a safety, that is not a concern at all with Caleb Downs. As someone who looks the part on film, it is not a concern at all. The reason why this is even, I think, even somewhat of a debate is because of the position that he plays and comparing that to other positions that the Bengals and any other team in the top 10 could think about drafting this year. Safety may be the Bengals' biggest need on paper in terms of who they had lining up and starting for them in 2025. And there's a discussion right there. Do you address your biggest need with your first round pick when you're in a position of drafting in the top 10 and thinking about all of the other alternative factors that go into that? Safety, at the end of the day, is not defensive end. It's not offensive tackle. It's not quarterback. It's not even wide receiver in terms of how these guys get paid on the open market. We're going to see a lot of safeties come off the board in free agency this March. A lot of them are going to be in the teens in terms of their average annual value. None of them are necessarily going to break the bank and become maybe the highest paid safety. Maybe that becomes Brian Cook. We'll see what his market is. Brian Cook obviously went to the University of Cincinnati and is going to be a popular free agent target for a lot of Bengals fans. The reason why Caleb Downs is not locked in to be a top 3, top 5 pick is because the NFL looks at him and doesn't necessarily see the value of drafting a pass rusher or drafting a pass protector or just drafting a passer in general. Those are the big three. That's the holy trinity in terms of what the NFL values at the top of the draft. If they can get a top pass rusher, pass protector, or quarterback with a player that's worth a top 5 pick, those guys are going to go there every single time. We haven't seen a safety be drafted as high as 6th overall since Jamal Adams all the way back in, I believe, 2017, right? Caleb Downs has been seen in mock drafts going before the Bengals, sometimes to the Washington Commanders at 7th overall, sometimes to the Kansas City Chiefs at 9th overall. I don't think I've seen more than like a handful of mocks in which he goes even higher than that. I think maybe once there was one where he went second overall to the New York Jets. And I understand that because in some boards, in some cases, Caleb Downs is the second best overall player in this class when just looking at production, when looking at what he looks like on film, and just the confidence that this guy is just going to be a good NFL player. And I think that is more than anything why there is this confidence and this ferocity of a passion about Caleb Downs to the Bengals, because when the Bengals are a team that it's basically just a flip of a coin as to whether or not the first round pick is going to be just a good NFL player, there's a lot of confidence in Caleb Downs being that. But the value is why this is even a debate in the first place. Is it smart for a team like the Bengals that doesn't necessarily give grown up contracts to free agents on the open market or to just players who aren't Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase? Is it smart to use one of your most valuable resources on a player that plays a position that does not get paid relatively high compared to other more valuable positions? Is it smart for the Bengals to use that pick on a safety compared to maybe a defensive end, maybe in a cornerback, maybe a defensive tackle if one is there, worth it? All those positions end up becoming more valuable for your team's success or just more valuable on the open market. And maybe it's smart for the Bengals specifically compared to maybe the Detroit Lions who don't necessarily care about positional value in the draft. That's where I think the conversation really comes to a head in terms of like, it's not as slam of a dunk as most fans, I think, would consider it, despite all of the positives that Caleb Downs brings to the table. And that is where I do want to bring in my good friend, and I hope yours as well, Mike Santagata, to the stage. Mike, what's going on, man?
Oh, not much. Ready to talk some Caleb Downs. You got anything going on?
No, man. It's just I'm watching the TikTok comments right now. Like I've seen videos, I've seen like my comment section for any relatively NFL draft centric stuff about the Bengals, and it's just Caleb Downs in period. It's Caleb Downs period because I get it, right? Like you live in Ohio, you're not an Ohio State fan like myself. You're more of a Youngstown guy. Some struggles with that in general, but we've seen this before, right? We like obviously there was the Billy Price thing all the way back in 2018. The same Hubbard was in the same class. We can both agree that Caleb Downs is in another stratosphere compared to those guys. But we've seen Ohio State prospects come through in the draft process and how they fit the Bengals, and it does seem like Caleb Downs is by far the best Ohio State prospect that has ever been really linked to the Bengals like this. But you have already watched Caleb Downs as a prospect. You have some takes on him. I just want plain clear and simple. What do you like about Caleb Downs as a football player?
I think he's extremely intelligent. I think that's one thing that Ohio State utilized. Felt this way about Xavier Watts last year, but just a guy that it feels like the eye candy, understanding that offensive concepts a lot of the time are clear out eye candy and then what they actually want to hit. And he's taking that away. It felt like the Ohio State put him in a position to be a little closer to the ball, which interesting because will that be the case when he gets drafted in the NFL? We'll see, but he played a lot of the robber role in Tampa too. He played some man coverage against tight ends and never saw any issues technically or with his movement ability there. I think when it comes to what he's great at, you've got, to me, the intelligence, the movement ability. I think he has the mentality too. You look at he's not the type of defensive back, and I've watched a few guys that just, when they go to make a tackle, they basically just roll around on the grass at their legs like a barrel and Donkey Kong. So I see him actually try to make these tackles, could keep his eyes up a little bit better, but he wraps up, he gets low, he keeps his cleats in the ground as he's trying to make these tackles so he can keep driving his feet too for a little bit undersized guy for some of the situations he's in. I think the tackle form is pretty exceptional. He feels like a guy you could play anywhere. I think you look at this and go, okay, so why didn't Ohio State play him as, say, the center fielder, deep middle third safety if he is this incredible mover? I didn't see anything that told me he couldn't do it. I think what they liked was keeping him in that intermediate area because, I mean, you and I will know here, and probably a lot of people watching and listening, that safety in the deep middle third, he's not really he's making an impact, but when the ball's thrown, it's usually not with, he's not the reason, or he's not the main coverage player when it's thrown. We saw this with Jesse Bates a lot too, where I think that affected his PFF grade sometimes. There was like 17 targets. It'd be like if he gets dunked on by an NFL player on one of those, suddenly he can't recover from the Pro Football Focus grade. But with Caleb Downs, it really feels like he's intelligent. I think he does a great job in man and zone coverage, and he has the mentality and the technique to play in the run game too. Feels like an all-around easy projected to be a good player. Nothing's a guarantee in the NFL draft, but this feels like there's a really good shot this guy's going to be a plus starter.
100%. And I feel like, again, like when you're talking about who the Bengals should target with the 10th overall pick, when they've had these giant swings and sometimes misses, specifically like even last year, right? Like Shamar Stewart is a giant project, and you have no idea if any of the positives that he has as a player is going to immediately translate into the NFL. There's like a comfortability with Caleb Downs because you've seen it against some of the best teams in just a scheme that you just feel like is going to translate really well. But I like that you brought up the whole center field aspect of this, because obviously the Bengals have been chasing their tails with Jesse Bates for the past 3 years and just figuring out how to replace them. And they've tried different methods. They tried having Dax Hill back there. They've tried having Geno Stone back there. They failed with Nick Scott as well. And Caleb Downs on paper, again, like the ball, the true ball production may be like the one weakness in his production profile. But again, it's a matter of how much did he play there, how many opportunities did he have, and can he actually do it? But I do want to expand more upon that when regards to like what the Bengals need as a safety, because they tried to pigeonhole Geno Stone in there, even though it's not really what he did in Baltimore. And Caleb Downs coming into there, naturally he would be the Geno Stone replacement. But do you see like the Bengals trying to use Caleb Downs the way that they try to have Geno Stone in there for the past 2 years, or do you think there would have to be an evolution in how that position, the free safety position in this defense, would have to evolve with Caleb Downs in there?
It's interesting. I think the pessimistic approach is that you just think, hey, they're just gonna try to replace one-to-one with Geno Stone, and I think he'd be solid in that role. But I do wonder about if that takes away from some of his abilities as a run defender. It takes away some of his abilities being so far away from the ball to make plays for your defense. I think he could be a great free safety just ranging sideline to sideline, and you might have to as well when you think about who could be paired next to him. It's not as if that's Jordan Battle's strength. You're not going to play single high coverages all the time, so it's not going to be he's going to do that 80 or 60 snaps a game or something. But I do think that is a possibility. To me, he's a guy that's so versatile that I would like to see him moved around. He can play man on tight ends and take them away. He can play this intermediate levels of the zone coverage and take stuff away. He's got great eyes to take that stuff away. I think he could be a great free safety in just playing that middle field role, but there's just a tiny bit of projection because we don't see it that much at Ohio State. Nothing about his movement ability to me seemed to indicate he couldn't do it. Nothing about his ability to read an offense seemed to indicate that he couldn't do it. But I do just think you get that little bit of, well, we haven't seen it. So can he for sure do it? That'd be where I'm not, 100% there. And that's why I think you would want him in a role where he's doing a lot of stuff he's used to doing. And then you sprinkle that in there, of course, and over time, maybe he develops into being an incredible middle field safety. But I'm not sure if you could take a guy who wasn't doing that last year and just expect him like, yeah, you were the 10th pick. I expect you to be a Pro Bowl level center field safety and go out there and do it for 40 snaps in this game.
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
Yeah, and like in this defense specifically, right? Because they tried to pigeonhole Geno Stone into that role, and clearly he just wasn't up to snuff. And there were more than just like Geno Stone's angles and coverage that were his problem, right? He just was one of the worst tacklers that I think either of us have ever seen at the NFL level. And that Caleb Downs is going to bring an immediate upgrade to that. But when you're talking about drafting a safety with the 10th overall pick, right? Because Kyle Hamilton is the gold standard as this positionless safety that can just do a bunch of different things. Nick Emmanwori was targeted by Mike McDonald for that exact same purpose. And obviously Emmanwori is the next big thing as he just won the Super Bowl, right? So for you specifically as an evaluator of this position, what qualities does a safety need to bring to warrant that investment? Or is it just Caleb Downs just does enough things at a high level where you just don't really worry about it at that point?
Yeah, those guys to me, they're almost outliers, right? You think of Emmanwori and he had the best RAS relative athletic score that they've ever tracked. And he's also ginormous pterodactyl. Kyle Hamilton's kind of the same thing. He didn't have the athleticism tested, at least his straight line speed, had everything else, and he's ginormous. He's like 6'4", and he's also like a pterodactyl. I think that's one thing you would knock Caleb Downs for is, yes, we're drafting a guy that I think is really intelligent, really technically sound, and is going to make a great impact on this defense. He's not built like a freak. He's kind of normal looking for a safety. There's been plenty of great normal looking safeties out there. You think Derwin James or Jesse Bates isn't a towering presence at safety. So that's two different ends where Derwin James is kind of a box type of guy, can play the slot. And then Jesse Bates is typically your deeper safety. I think this year with Atlanta, with Xavier Watts, they kind of played him in the box a little bit more. But, you've all ends of the spectrum at this size. I don't think it stops me personally from drafting him that high, in part because I do think this draft class is not the best. I mean, there's going to be some options there at 10, and we're not here to talk about all of them. But I think I'm looking at him. I think the only thing that would stop me is what he was asked to do at Ohio State. If my defensive coordinator says I need a guy that's just going to play sideline to sideline from the free safety position, I'm not sure I'm going to use Caleb Downs' abilities, put him in the best position to succeed in that situation compared to a defensive coordinator who might be saying, I'm a little interested in letting him play a lot of different roles and maybe easing him into some of the stuff he wasn't doing at Ohio State. But yeah, I think that plus the size would maybe slow me down a little bit, but there's so much he does well. To me, he's a great pick at 10. He's probably my preferred pick at 10, my number one choice. And who knows if he'll even be there. You gave a long talk about that early on, but I think you take him, you're going to get, at least to me, I know I'm going to get a guy that should be a plus starter. And there's a chance he's a star. There's a pretty good chance he's a star because of his mental side of the game and the technical side already being where they are at his young age.
Yeah, and GB Pigskin in the comment section throwing out the Buda Baker comparison as well. Like I think Buda Baker, I didn't know this. I don't know if you knew this, Sans, but he's a NFL 2010s Hall of Famer, the Hall of Fame team, which is I didn't really know that. Yeah, he's all decade for 2010s for making a couple Pro Bowls and an All Pro. But like Buda Baker is such a unique case because he's very much undersized, but he always came down to the box and he always made a bunch of plays, and he never really worried about where he fit on a field. And I think it's the same thing with Caleb Downs, where like if you can put him in the slot, if you're committed to that, you can have a man and as the overhang defender, things of that nature, right? Like just any real like defined role I think Caleb Downs can probably do. And that's why there's like, again, this comfortability with, like there's nothing really wrong with this guy on tape. It's just a matter of, do you have a plan with him and what's the value of him compared to the Reuben Baines of the world, to the David Baileys of the world, right? These other options that the Bengals are going to have. And who knows, like you said, like when the draft comes around, there's 9 picks off the board. You don't know what run at what position is going to happen at that point. Offensive tackle is going to be a conversation as well. But with Caleb Downs, I did think that, like, we've had this discussion a little bit with Dax Hill and how he started at safety and then moved to cornerback, and how at Michigan, like the whole reason why he was first round pick was because he was phenomenal as the star defender for Michigan and playing in the slot more times than not. And there's some similarities, I think, with what he did well in Michigan with what Caleb Downs does well as well. Is there any fear about, hey, like the Bengals tried to do this with one guy and trying to move him around? Is there any fear that, like, hey, like if you bring in Caleb Downs and they're not totally married, just have him just be this one-to-one replacement for Geno Smith? Is there any worry about him, like, just being this positionless guy in which the Bengals haven't really proved that they can, just manage that?
I think I'm not nearly as worried about it because to me, Dax Hill really was like a full-time nickel. I haven't really seen Caleb Downs as that. I think he plays more roles in the Ohio State defense, along with, I think, coming into the league, he's more technically refined, and I think he comes into the league with a higher football IQ, just able to process everything that offenses are trying to do to him. That's where I think the difference for me personally is, where I look at that and think there's a reason Dax Hill fell to the 30s, right? Or wherever you got picked. Whereas Caleb Downs being talked about as a top 10 pick might not even be there for the Bengals at 10. So that's where I think the changes for me. I was also thinking, since you brought up all 2010s team was Eric Berry, also like 6', 210.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of safeties this size, so that's why I'm not that worried about the size thing. But it is funny that the biggest two safeties that you're going to point to the recent draft classes, they're like pterodactyls. They're like 6'4", ginormous arms, and RAS freaks.
Yeah, and like size and athleticism in general has never been like the safeties have to be like these uber athletes, right? Like with Nick Warrior last year, tested phenomenally, but we knew that he was already a good player. So like the athleticism was just like the cherry on top, right? You were pretty confident that he can come in immediately and be a good player for you, despite how young he was. And the same thing is with Caleb Downs, right? And now that he's projected as a top 10 pick, you naturally think about like, is this guy a high end athlete? Is he going to be able to move well against NFL receivers and things of that nature and like to keep up with the speed of the game. But in general, like historically, high end athleticism for safeties is not a prerequisite. It's one of the most mental like base positions on the field. And that's why I think the Bengals really lean into, we don't really care about like speed. Like we can have Geno Stone and Jordan Battle as your 4-6 safeties out there as long as they're in position. And unfortunately, for most part, they haven't been, which is why like you need a balance with it a little bit there. And so I would say that like athleticism in terms of overall size and physicality, Caleb Downs is not going to be in that upper tier. But if everything else, if the mental is there, if he's always in position, if he's making these tackles, if he brings the needed just upside compared to what the Bengals have been dealing with in recent years at the spot, you can definitely make the case that this is just you just make the pick and you just move on with your life regardless about anything else. But I think how I want to end this with you specifically and just how you watch film and how you evaluate these guys, because the mental and like the leadership aspect is talked about so much with Caleb Downs, and just how he gets guys lined up and is like the catalyst of the defense. When you're watching him, how much does that actually pop off in terms of how you notice it when you're watching the tape, and like does it actually make that much of an impact in terms of how other guys around him play?
I think there's an impact because I'm not sure how much I can put into it, because what I'm seeing from just the film is a hand signal, a tap on the shoulder, mouthpiece out, clearly saying something to his teammate, and that guy moving over, getting in better position to make a play or making an adjustment based off of what he's seeing. Probably in college, a lot of calls from the sideline, looking over, getting that call, making all the adjustments back there. I think there's an impact there because this guy's, there's never going to be anything wrong with being a great teammate, a great leader, and working and being able to adjust calls on the defensive side of the ball. But it's hard when you don't exactly know. Like I could see him look like he's playing a guitar or a banjo and know he's like, I was probably making a banjo call over there or something. But I can't, I don't know all of their hand signals and calls to make sure everything got effectively communicated. But I can say when I saw him make communications, seemed like guys got in better positions to make plays in those spots. So it seems like he's a great communicator, and that's really important on the defense, because a lot of people talk about offensive line communication, and that is hugely important. But the defensive backs and linebackers, the coverage players, they communicate just about as much. So having a guy back there that feels confident doing that, I think that is a plus for this defense, which over the last 2 years, to be honest, has had a lot of communication issues.
100%. And if even if it's kind of a bad thing on paper, right? The Bengals are not going to be afraid of having a rookie being thrusted into this role, as clearly evidenced by Barrett Carter and Demetrius Knight being the starting linebackers both by week 6. And yeah, like if you're in a position in which you strike out at safety and free agency, and Caleb Downs is there, I don't think they would have any issues with kind of just giving him the reins at that point. Mike, since you're still here, and we have this interesting question from Don Morris, I do want to get your take on a Max Crosby situation in which the Bengals do something completely uncharacteristic and they trade away, future draft picks for a superstar player. Max Crosby obviously pairing up with Miles Murphy as a long-term edge. Yeah, is it slam dunk for you? Like, would you give up the 10th pick for Max Crosby?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they have to pay him. Like that's the biggest issue, right? Trey Hendrickson, they didn't want to pay him. He's a little bit younger. I think he's a better run defender. I think he's an extremely high motor guy. He plays almost every snap for the Raiders. I don't know if they would want him 100% to do that, but I would do it because this is one of the best all-around edge players in the league. But to be honest, I would have also paid Trey Hendrickson. So,
well, I mean, Max Crosby got paid last year, right? So he's getting
yeah. They have to feel comfortable, I guess,
right,
giving out that amount of money.
Yeah, like Max Crosby's 2027 salary becomes guaranteed, I believe, on March 13th, vested for injury. And that's, obviously a big detraction for the Bengals in their history. So yeah, Max Crosby is going to be maybe another conversation for another time. But Caleb Downs, there you have it, folks. I think production, tape, borderline athleticism, they're all checks. Like when we wrap up this draft process and we look at like who the best options are, 10th overall, Caleb Downs is going to be in that conversation. It's just about what the Bengals do at safety before the draft comes around. Are there any other players with similar grades who maybe play maybe more valuable positions? And just at that point, when the draft unfolds, who are the best player options that are going to be available to them? But I think in general, the case with Caleb Downs is pretty open and shut. And I want to thank Mike for providing his film takes as well. So, Mike, appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks for having me.
Mike Santagata, everyone. Definitely follow Mike at Bengals Sands, at Bengals_Sands on Twitter, on X, or whatever the fuck you call it. Great stuff from him as always. Yeah, I think that answers a lot about what Caleb Downs is, and I think when you're talking about it from a Bengals perspective, it's never just about how good of a player is he, right? Because the Bengals deal with these parameters that are self-imposed with how they build their team and how many resources they have at their disposal. And if it's smart to draft a certain position in the first round compared to what they do in free agency, there's all these other factors that go into it beyond just how good of a player that he is. And I think Caleb Downs, there's no argument that he is one of the best players in this draft. Very, really high quality prospect. There's going to be some people who are concerned about his lack of ball production, lack of size, lack of overall athleticism. I think in general, at the safety position, it doesn't stand in terms of the importance, and that's definitely plays into Caleb Downs' favor. And that's why I think he's probably not going to leave the top 10 or 11 picks when the draft comes around. I would be really interested to see how he tests at Indianapolis as well, and whether or not that actually impacts if he's really just locked in to be this top 7, top 8 pick. But I understand why every Ohio State Bengals fan under the sun wants Caleb Downs and is even considering boycotting season tickets if they don't draft him, right? But there's a lot more that goes into that, and these are the conversations that the Bengals are going to have over the next 2 months. And I'm glad we were able to have it tonight with someone that I trust more than most in this industry about identifying what actually matters on the field. So that's going to do it for this week. This week's stream on A to Z Sports Cincinnati. I'm John Sheeran. Talk to you next guy.